Hello, my name is Andrew Wood, and today I will be talking about the Platonic dialogue called Euthyphro. One day, Socrates sees Euthyphro outside the ancient equivalent of a courthouse. The argument of this dialogue is based around the question of piety and whether or not it can be taught. Socrates eggs Euthyphro on to offer one definition after another for the word. Socrates is seeking a definition of piety that will be universally true. With this universal truth, Socrates seeks to be able to judge all actions on their piety. Euthyphro offers his first definition of piety regarding his current course of action. He is on his way to have his father charged with murder. After killing a slave, a servant is killed by exposure after Euthyphro's father binds him and throws him in a pit. Socrates rejects this as an act of piety because it is not a definition, it is merely an example of piety. On Euthyphro's second attempt to define piety, he says that piety is what is pleasing to the gods. Socrates accepts this definition, but criticizes it on the grounds that the gods disagree amongst themselves as to what is exactly pleasing. Therefore, what is pleasing to one god is not necessarily pleasing to another. This introduces the idea of divine command theory, which basically means what the gods say goes. In this scenario, since there are many gods, an action could be simultaneously pious and impious. Euthyphro attempts to argue against Socrates' criticism by pointing out that not even the gods would disagree amongst themselves, that someone who kills without just cause deserves to be punished. Socrates argues back that disputes will arise over just how much justification there was, and hence the same could still be both, or how much justification there actually was, and hence the same action could be both pious and impious. So yet again, Euthyphro's definition cannot possibly be correct. Euthyphro tries to overcome Socrates' objection by slightly altering his definition. What all the gods love is pious, and what they all hate is impious. At this point, Socrates asks, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Socrates coaxes Euthyphro to agree that when we call a thing carried, it is simply because it is carried, not because it possesses some inherent attribute that we would call carried. This means that being carried is not an essential characteristic of the thing carried. Being carried is merely a state. The same is true with piety, if piety is defined as what is liked by the gods. It is liked for some reason by itself, and this does not make it pious. The liking must follow from recognition that an action is pious, and not the other way around. This demonstrates the cracks in Euthyphro's argument. Confused by Socrates' dismantling of his argument, Euthyphro agrees that the gods like an action because it is pious. Socrates argues that the unanimous approval of the gods is merely an attribute of piety and is not part of its defining characteristics. Therefore, it is not an accurate universal definition. Finally, Socrates offers his own definition of what it is to be pious. He begins by stating that piety is related to justice. However, as he then points out a little later, this is not enough for a definition, since piety belongs to those actions that we have called just. He explains that one cannot simply call something just because we must still prove it. Euthyphro then takes another approach, by suggesting that piety is concerned with the taking care of the gods. Socrates explains that the gods do not need looking after the same way that crops or animals do. Surely the gods can look after themselves. Euthyphro responds that caring for the gods involves service. When questioned by Socrates as to exactly what is the result of piety, Euthyphro falls back on his earlier claim that piety is simply what is loved by the gods. Euthyphro then attempts to get more specific by stating that piety is the art of personal sacrifice and prayer. He describes piety as a form of knowledge of how to do exchange with the gods. Socrates presses Euthyphro to answer what good prayer and sacrifice actually do the gods. Euthyphro objects that the gifts offered to the gods are not like literal kinds that Socrates is suggesting, but more ritualistic and symbolic. In other words, as he admits, piety is inseparable from what pleases the gods. At this, Euthyphro says that he must attend to his business, and the dialogue comes to a close.